Round 1, fight!
Sega were giving their cookie cutter a good workout by churning out a few games in quick succession. Last Bronx is a 1996 3D fighting video game developed by Sega AM3. It was released in Japanese and American arcades before home versions were produced for the Sega Saturn and the Microsoft Windows system. Set in a crime-ridden Tokyo, the game follows rival street gangs who take part in a weapon fighting tournament. Last Bronx became a big hit in Japan, and it was soon novelised and serialised into comics and radio drama, and a year later, Takashi Shimizu directed the direct-to-video live-action movie. Each match is a best out of 2 rounds fight, with victory by knockout or remaining health at the end of the 30-second time limit. The stages are set in real Tokyo City closed arenas without any ring-outs. However, fighters can jump on the barriers. Sega AM3 used the same punch, kick and guard 3-button system introduced in Virtua Fighter. The player uses the arcade joystick to move the character. Certain joystick and button combinations result in special attacks and combination attacks. The guard button is used to block the opponent's attacks and to perform a feint attack called the attack cancel. Strong attacks, throws and rolling moves can be performed using different button combinations. The game was designed to be quite realistic, with realistic style and people. Last Bronx characters wear clothes based on current Tokyo street fashions. While working on the game, the developers found that the weapons couldn't be seen during attacks because of how fast they were moving. This led to them programming the weapons to leave after images when in motion. And speaking of the weapons, I initially thought this was going to be like a 3D version of Samurai Showdown or something, but really, it's just Virtua Fighter with weapons. And on first play in the arcades, I was disappointed, but not surprised that I didn't really enjoy the game. It just seemed like Sega were making every one of their 3D fighters using the Virtua Fighter mould. And it's not hard to see why really. Virtua Fighter 1 and 2 were massive hits in the arcade and real coin munchers. I guess Sega were still experimenting with the formula, or just throwing loads of mud at the wall and seeing what sticks. By the time it got released into arcades, it just looked like every other Sega 3D fighter. And yes, I did give it a go briefly in the arcades, as I was still desperate to find a 3D fighter other than Virtua Fighter that I really enjoyed. But I also played it just for the hell of it. I'd left school and I was making money, so throwing a couple of quid away in an arcade game was no big deal. But I did struggle to enjoy the game as much as I had enjoyed other fighting games, and in my opinion, Virtua Fighter beats this game hands down. And in this arena, there were 2 companies now fighting for that top spot in this genre, Sega and Namco. And Namco were going great guns with Tekken and Soul Edge, which looked and played very differently from each other. Sega, on the other hand, just looked a little lost by this point. And this view was generally shared among video game journalists, with some pointing out that it done very little to differentiate itself from Sega's previous fighting games. The visual style is so close to Virtua Fighter 2 and Fighting Vipers. Not that that's a bad thing, but again, by now, in the arcades, with polygon games appearing all over the place, graphics had just got to that level where it would be a complete shock if a game looked terrible. And the same for the sound. So games now relied solely upon the gameplay to keep the players coming back. And the gameplay was just too similar to Virtua Fighter. But Last Bronx had some more complex combos to execute, and if you wanted to put in the effort, it could be quite a rewarding game to play. But for me, my interest in gaming was shifting. I still enjoyed the trips to arcades for that quick blast, but with games like Tomb Raider and Resident Evil and the like to play at home, games that you could literally spend a few hours each night playing just to progress. And so the dedication to learn all new combos and attacks was just not there really, especially in this genre, as I still much preferred the 2D sprite based fighters. But a mate of mine who had a Saturn really enjoyed the game, and when he purchased it for that console, you know I was going to have a versus session with him. Much like Fighting Vipers, this port is outstanding and a thoroughly top-notch conversion from the arcade. And I did much prefer playing it on the Saturn over the arcade version. Must have been because I was playing it for free. The Saturn version was developed by the same team which created the arcade original. They started work on the conversion in 1996. And it was first demoed in April 1997 at the Tokyo Game Show. Since they believed the fast weapons movement to be the key element to the game's appeal, they prioritised retaining all the animation data and the 60 frames per second frame rate of the arcade version. But there was a problem. None of the development team had ever worked on a Saturn game before. Visually, it's a very, very good reproduction of the arcade, with only some minor differences to be found that have no impact on the gameplay at all. And again, the sound is recreated perfectly. The other thing that has been recreated perfectly is the gameplay. Even though I only played it a couple of times in the arcade, it just felt exactly how I remembered it. Well, apart from all the bloody loading that is. Another feature of the home port was obviously the ability to figure out the combos without the pressure of getting beat in a few seconds in the arcade. And certainly, over the course of a few weeks, I did play this quite a bit whenever I was over at his house. But he also had Virtua Fighter 2, and we just kept gravitating back to that. And that was a big problem with Last Bronx. It just was not as good as Virtua Fighter, but I think I might be alone in that thinking, as Last Bronx was a massive success for Sega. And it's a real shame, as they desperately needed to get things right, as the Saturn was now falling further and further behind the PlayStation in terms of sales. Another nail in its coffin, on the home ports at least, was the release of Fighters Megamix the previous year. This was Sega's salvo towards SNK in an attempt to duplicate the success of the King of Fighters series, which wasn't actually a bad game, but look out for that video coming soon. My overall opinion of Last Bronx is that it's a well presented, well executed game. It just wasn't new or fresh, and seemed devoid of inspiration, and instead just made a few small tweaks to Virtua Fighter, which was still miles better. But that was my look back at Last Bronx. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Last Bronx on any format. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of your support, so thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.
Round 2, fight!
Sawala naida, koala ya